Podcast.
Always be cool.
The show where your hosts, DZ and BK, showcase your local business and real estate pros going gangbusters in leadership, community involvement, and just being cool.
Here are your hosts, serial entrepreneurs, mortgage experts at Summit Lending, and partners in crime, Darren Copeland and Bobby Kerr.
All right, everybody, it's the Always Be Cool podcast, hanging out with your hosts, Bobby Kerr, Darren Copeland.
What's up, everybody?
We've got a really, really special guest today. He brings each and every Royals game into our hearts, minds, homes, with words that most people couldn't even dream of doing.
Right.
Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Ryan Lefebvre.
All right, as always, here we go. Born February 12th, 1971. He's the son of former Major League Jim Lefebvre, graduated from the University of Minnesota, was the MVP, Bobby, of the Golden Gophers baseball team back in 1993.
Yes, sir.
He established school records for hits, triples, and at-bats. Radio and TV announcer for the Kansas City Royals since 1999. In 2008, was the author of his book titled The Shame of Me, One Man's Journey to Depression and Back. He is the founder of Gloves for Kids and Footprints Foundation. In 2011, he received the Buck O'Neil MVP Award for his commitment to the youth here in Kansas City. All-around awesome guy. Ryan Lefebvre, welcome to the show. We have a little music for you.
Well, all I need now is a pine tar rag and an aluminum bat.
Yes.
And my maroon and gold jersey on, and I'm ready to lead off the game.
Does that just get you in the spirit or what?
Yeah. I don't care what anybody says. This is a great song.
That's amazing.
I love it. So for those of us that are listening, Ryan, maybe you can tell the story of why we're playing that mashup between New Kids and the CNC Music Factory.
So it's a two-part story, and it began with Denny Matthews and I years ago. Sorry, here I speak for a living, and I can't.
You're good.
That's all right. It's a morning after a good win.
And a long one. So
yes, exactly.
Denny and I were just having some fun in probably a blowout radio game, and we were talking about walk-up songs. And the games that I do on radio, one of the things that I try and do, and I always say it's radio's answer to high-definition television. You know, what can we do on radio to make the fans feel like they're at the ballpark? I mean, that was the original purpose of games on radio, was to get people in the mindset of, I want to go out there and I want to see what I'm hearing, and then using the crowd and the sounds to make people, when they're driving in their car or they're in the garage or whatever, feel like they're at the ballpark. Mm-hmm. So years ago, I talked to our then engineer, Don Free, and I said, hey, when the batters come up, can you bring up the public address announcer? So when you hear now batting Nick Prado, it's not in the background. It comes right through your radio like you're at the ballpark.
Nice.
Well, what came with that was the players' walk-up songs. And so Denny and I were having some fun with, the Latin players come up and they've got these, songs that make you just want to run through a wall,
Right.
And then other guys like to have fun with it. There was an outfielder named Josh Reddick who used to play Careless Whisper by Wham, which reminded me of a girl that broke my heart in junior high school. And every time I'd hear that song, I would think of this girl who ended up breaking up with me to date my best friend, so it would rip my heart out every time Josh Reddick would come to the plate. So eventually the conversation turned toward what would be your walk-up song? And I said, well, I have one. And I, try and explain New Kids on the Block and the CNC Music Factory to Denny Matthews. And so Don Free, in the meantime, plays it in the middle of the broadcast. And then what came from that is the second part of the story is I have this strange fascination with boy bands. And it began, probably began when I was in college. And New Kids on the Block was becoming, worldwide stars. But for college kids, especially Division I athletes, I mean, you would never listen to New Kids on the Block.
Never.
That's not the cool thing to do, right?
So one of my teammates, his name is Jeff Schmidt. He was drafted in the first round and played briefly with the Angels, and now he's an athletic director at the University of Wisconsin, our arch rival. Mm-hmm. He and I thought when we would go to these big college parties, sorry guys,
Okay.
When we would go to these college parties and you got all these masculine guys with their keg cup in their hand and trying to be cool, and they're playing Guns N' Roses, and we would sneak behind everyone and slip in a New Kids on the Block cassette tape, just to get a reaction out of everybody, which then evolved into us pretending like we liked New Kids on the Block and we learned the lyrics and we would just annoy our teammates. And sorry, this is becoming a terribly long story, but
This is
I love it.
anyway, that's the confluence, if you will, of my walk-up song and New Kids on the Block.
Love it.
Right.
Love it.
A lot of people, I don't think really realize, Ryan, but I mean, you were one heck of an athlete there as a Gopher at the University of Minnesota.
Heck yeah.
I mean, what was it? Was it 91 and 93, all Big Ten? Is that correct?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I mean, like, baller stuff. I mean, you were even drafted in the 27th round by the Cleveland Indians. So, I mean, you clearly know the game, and obviously, growing up with your dad and that influence. But yeah, it was really fun because Bobby and I like to joke, Ryan, we do more research now than what we did in high school and college for this type of stuff.
Me too.
Seriously,
Right.
You absolutely do, right? I mean, that's what I think most people don't understand when you're doing TV or radio or any type of public appearance like this. There's a large amount of research that you have to do before each game or each podcast or whatever it is. I mean, maybe you can speak a little bit to that so that people don't just assume that you're just shooting from the hip each night, right?
Yeah, it's an interesting combination of preparation and then stories just sometimes just fall out of the sky, and we'll be in the game, and I will remember something that I would have never thought of if not for a situation in the game that reminded me of, remember when Joe Randa did this, or Carlos Beltran, or I remember when I was a kid and I was at Dodger Stadium and such happened. So some of it is just a memory that I'm not aware of until there it is.
Yeah.
But there is preparation before every game. And I was just having this conversation with my mom. We were talking on the phone, and she lives in Kansas City and she watches every game, and she was saying something about how much information I had, and I said, it is the exact opposite of what I was as a student, where I would just cram the night before a test and just try and retain as much information as I could just to survive the test. And now I try and do the opposite, where I do a fair amount of work every day to avoid having to cram. So on the last homestand, we played the Padres, and we haven't seen the Padres in a long time. I mean, there were 6 or 7 guys on their roster I'd never even heard of. I didn't have any information on them at all. So the weeks leading up to the Padres series, one by one, I'll read up on every player so that by the time the series arrives, I'm not frantically trying to figure out who everybody is. So I've learned as an adult what I wish I had done as a kid in high school and college, of just doing a little bit of work every day, so I'm not cramming at the last minute.
Well, I'm sure that has something to do with maybe studying baseball, which is so awesome, and your passion, rather than studying for a biology or algebra.
Yeah,
probably.
That's exactly right. No, I think it's definitely probable for sure. For me, it is, at least.
Right.
So you mentioned your mom, right? So I think your mom is a big part of your story, right? You've talked about her in other podcasts. You talk about her in the book, your relationship with your parents. It's funny, and not funny, but I was listening to a podcast a long time ago that you did several years ago, where you described your familial situation, your family growing up in Southern California, and obviously your dad playing for the Dodgers, and then your parents get divorced, and you described that situation as a movie. And like your parents were these main characters, these main actors, and then you were kind of like an extra in the movie. Do you remember using that quote?
I don't remember that exact quote, but it makes sense, because I think anybody from a divorced family, and especially an only child, they're the only link of this marriage that both parents would otherwise just forget about and go on with their lives. But they have to stay connected because of the child bouncing back and forth, and holidays and shared custody or whatever. Mm-hmm. And so that was something that I took on at a very young age. I don't think I fully understood it until I got older, when there was that search for, where do I belong, and who loves me? And both my parents remarried. They had kids in their second marriages. And so, I mean, they really wished that they could separate from that previous marriage and just move on with their new families. And yet here I am. I'm a reminder of a marriage that went wrong. And so that was an issue for me at a very young age, is just, figuring out where I was going to get my identity. I was a strange dynamic where I was an only child in a rather large extended family. So I had a lot of cousins who had siblings, and we'd get together for Thanksgiving and Christmas and Easter, and there would just be cousins who had their own siblings running around, and kids in my neighborhood had siblings. And so it was a very lonely time for me, and it took me a lot of years to sort that out. And unfortunately, like a lot of us do, when we don't know where we belong and who loves us and where that comes from, we end up going into places that make our situation worse, not better.
Right.
Sure.
Right.
Well,
Absolutely.
Our good friend, our mutual friend, Les Norman, who's a really good buddy of ours and was honestly one of our very first guests that we had on the podcast.
Yeah, we actually took Les. So, Bobby and I have been going to Royals fantasy camp for years, right? Mm-hmm. So that's how we've got some of these connections and know Dina Blevins really well. And so Les was one of the first guys we talked to, and just a couple months ago, we took him out for coffee, and we're like, hey, man, so we're thinking about doing this podcast, talking about always being cool and bringing the light and sharing cool stories and, just bringing more positivity because, in this crazy times, positivity is a really good thing. And, man, he was just salt of the earth. He gave us so many, good tips because here's a couple guys that, if we got B's in high school and college, we were ecstatic, right? Sure. So here we are and have been fairly successful on the business side, but he has just done an awesome job kind of guiding us down this path. And we understand that you've got a pretty good relationship with him as well.
Yeah, we went to a Bible study together years ago. After 2 years in Kansas City, I moved full time after the 2000 season. I was going back to Minnesota. Wasn't sure I was going to survive the first 2 years in Kansas City, and so I kept my townhouse in the Minneapolis area, and I had an apartment in Overland Park. And after 2 years, I signed on again, and I thought I need to move to Kansas City and live here year round. Mike Sweeney and I were close friends, and we had similar faith backgrounds, and we were both single at the time, and we had similar life goals, and we really came into each other's lives at least for me, a very poignant time. And so one off season, he invited me to a Bible study, and he was there. Kevin Seitzer was there. Mike McFarland was there. Les Norman was there. Danon Hughes was there, and Danon and I go back to our college days when he was at Iowa and I was at Minnesota, because he also played baseball. He was a very good baseball player, the second round pick of the Brewers. And so so that was really my first group of guys to hang out with. And that's where I met Les. Group. Yeah, it was a great group of guys. Wow. And so I really didn't get to know Les that well right away because he was married and he was playing and coaching at the same time. He had young children. But
different season of life.
Season of life. I was single and had no kids, and I had all kinds of time on my hands. But he became a friend over the years, where it didn't take very long for us to sit and talk and get deep pretty quickly. And,
right.
It's funny you bring him up as we're doing a podcast, because he was doing a podcast during COVID, and he asked me to come on. And the first week, I completely forgot. I mean, I just forgot. And it was a morning after a night game, and I mean, I was just horrified. I mean, I by no means, as long as I've been doing this, have I given myself the grace to forget when someone else has taken the time. And so it was a live podcast. So he's waiting for me to call in, and he's just waiting for me.
Killing airtime.
And his wife, Kristen, is the one waiting for the phone call to come, and it never comes. And I just felt terrible. So I asked him, well, can we do it again? And he says, yes. So about a month later, I'm up and I'm ready to go. And we couldn't make a connection. And I can see him on my computer screen just filling and delaying, and it's quite impressive, the stuff that he was coming up with while Kristen and I are on the phone, and for whatever reason we just cannot make a connection. Similar to how we began recording here.
Right. I see a theme here.
Yeah,
right.
Almost completely my fault, if not all my fault. So I love Les Norman. He's a great man. He's been a tremendous friend to me, and the type of friend who says the right things at the right time when we need to hear those things. And yet I'm just still cringing right now thinking about those two podcasts.
If anybody's got the grace to give, it's him, and he's such
never
a
had me on
human.
again. By the way, after that,
maybe he doesn't have the grace.
2 strikes and you're out with Les Norman.
Right.
So.
And just so you know, Ryan, like, he's never mentioned that to us.
No.
So he hasn't even shared that story. So
Well, I brought him up.
It's simmering and burning inside of him.
I'm sure.
Right.
So I brought it up because you were talking about carrying that burden when you were young, right? That situation with your family, and how really you didn't know how to or didn't deal with it until you were older, which I think is a very, very common theme of kids that grew up in broken homes, especially when they divorce early. I was one of them. DC was one of them. Obviously you. But Les has a quote that has stuck with me since the day he said it here in the studio, and it's, behind every face is a drama unfolding. And that is so powerful, because someone who you think might have all of their stuff put together and everything on the outside looks great, and whether it's through social media nowadays or whether it was through TV in the early or mid 2000s, but you don't know what someone's going through just because they look like they've got their stuff put together. And so I think it's really powerful that you talk about carrying that burden from your parents, getting divorced and you being the only child from that marriage, and holding that, and not necessarily knowingly holding it, but having to deal with that burden your entire life. So that quote really, you talking about your story really reminded me of Les and that quote, because it's just powerful to understand that what someone's going through. You never know.
Well, and it's just like kind of like social media, Ryan. Everyone puts together the highlight reel of their life, right? And it's just like with us. I mean, everyone has something going on, and that's what I, really love about your book and what you do and what you talk about is everyone has something going, but to have the courage to actually stand up, deal with it head on, and realize that no one is perfect, man, that just really, really helps. Because I was, during the research, I came across an interview that you did with our former catcher, John Buck. I believe it was last summer. And, we've met John Buck at, some fancy cams, and just a super, super awesome human being. Yeah. And he was talking about some of the struggles that his family had went through, and some of, some suicides that come through the family. So I just think it's amazing, just getting the word out there and just admitting that everyone's not perfect, because I guarantee, there's some of the best baseball names or sports names out there, that everyone has some type of anxiety and things that they're dealing with. And I'm sure that probably when this book came out, I'm sure you probably had a lot of people reaching out to you and being like, hey, thank you for doing that, because I'm dealing with this. Was that kind of the trend that was happening?
Yeah, and that was really the reason I wrote the book. I mean, I'm not a writer. I don't journal. I don't express my feelings very often, through a pencil or a pen. I mean, I'm a talker, obviously, and that goes back to my childhood. But as I was getting better, and I started going to a counselor, and I had a life coach, and I was reading, and I was going to seminars. I mean, at my lowest point, when I didn't think I was going to make it, I'd made the decision that if this was going to get me before I got it, I was going to go down swinging, to borrow a baseball term. And so fortunately I had time on my side, because when I, being single and, I had my days available to me before the games at night. And then in the off season, I wasn't doing any other sports. So, I mean, I really could get after this. And as I got better, for my particular situation, I began to realize what was going on around me. And I could see that there were men who were struggling with pornography. They were struggling with alcohol or drugs, or they were a workaholic. They just could not turn the work switch off. Or sometimes they would just exercise like crazy, whatever. but it was some form of depression, some form of anxiety. And whether it was healthy, like working out, or perceived to be healthy, it was a form of therapy without actually doing therapy. Mm-hmm. And that's what I was doing in my life. I mean, I had a lot of those vices in my life, and I was finally getting to the root of the problem. Instead of dealing with the symptom and making the symptom feel good for an hour or a day or whatever, I needed to get to the root of the problem. And as I began to realize what my problem was, I could just see this going on all around me. Oh, that's why he behaves the way that he does. Oh, that's why he can't say no to this. That's why I've had this issue for years. And so what really got the ball rolling with my book is 2005 is when I hit rock bottom. And I shared with a few people what was going on, but I really kept it secret. I mean, I was embarrassed by it. There was shame that came with it. And I really felt like, guys, that nobody would care. I mean, who's going to feel sorry for me? I'm 34 years old. I live in a big house on Lake Winnebago. I'm a major league broadcaster. And I mean, where am I going to get sympathy? And it was embarrassing that I was feeling the way that I was, because I had checked off all of my career boxes before I turned 30 years old. Wow. But I didn't feel better when I turned 30. I felt worse, and I didn't understand. And for the next 4 years, I mean, I just slowly fell into this pit of depression, which, you know, was the very bottom of the pit was when I was 34 years old in 2005. So I go back to spring training in 2006, and word had spread that something had happened to me and that I was doing a lot better. I mean, people were just commenting about Ryan looks so much better, and you know, we can see the, you know, the life back in his personality or whatever. So Jeff Passan was writing for the Kansas City Star, and he asked me. He said, and if you remember in the glory days of the Kansas City Star, opening day they had this great baseball
huge spread.
Oh my gosh. I mean, it would take a week just to get through everything. It was great to prepare for the baseball season, and in particular for the Royals. And they would have a theme every year. And to be honest, I don't remember what the theme was, but I was one of the characters of the theme. So this is 2006, which would have been my 8th year with the Royals. And Jeff Passan is in spring training and says that the paper wants to do a story on you as part of this bigger story in the baseball feature. Can we go out to dinner? So we go out to dinner, and we're just having small talk. And finally, he pulls his tape recorder out, and he puts it on the table. And I'll never forget, he puts it on the table, and he hits record, and he goes, "So, who is Ryan Lefebvre?" And it was like an hour passed by in a second, where I just went back and thought about everything I had been through, who I had become, who I hope to continue to become, how I wanted to shape my life. And I had a choice. I could have given the same interview I've given 100 times of where I grew up, playing at the University of Minnesota, getting into broadcasting with the Minnesota Twins at a young age, coming to Kansas City, surviving, sitting in Fred White's chair, and you know, at that point we weren't winning yet. I mean, we were still a bad team with no hope on the horizon.
Exactly.
Dayton Moore hadn't even been hired yet that year. And I thought, I can give that interview again, and someone might find it interesting, or I can do something more meaningful here. And I just spilled my guts to him about everything I had gone through. Wow. And I see Jeff from time to time, and I've never asked him, did you know something was going on, or did you literally put the tape recorder out there with no expectation whatsoever?
Right.
Well, the response that I got was just overwhelming. And as fate would have it, that was the same spring that Zach Greinke walked away.
That's right.
And labeled it as depression and social anxiety disorder. And before that, guys, they would have just put him on the injured list with a sore shoulder. They just would have invented something. I mean, guys are having problems in their marriage. They're having problems with alcohol, whatever. But that would never be the reason why they went on the disabled list. It would be, you know, his hamstring is sore. His knee. I mean, they would hide behind another injury. Zach, to his credit, allowed them to say exactly what was going on. So that created a whole nother avenue
narrative
of me. Well, if this happened to Ryan, then maybe Ryan could explain what's happening with Zach. So the momentum just built over time. And then Jeffrey Flanagan approached me and asked me if I'd be willing to write a book about my experiences. Now, I say I'm not a writer, but as I was getting better, and I would call my mom on my drive home from a counselor or my life coach, or I listened to something on the radio that just really triggered something, I would call my mom and say, Mom, I think I understand why fill in the blank. She would say, write it down. And her reasoning was that I needed to start detailing my experiences and writing them down so that if I experienced a backslide, I could go read my own words, not my counselor's words, not helpful words from a self-help guru. And I was absorbing those books, reading them like crazy. But you need to go back and read your own realizations from your own journey. So when you feel terrible about yourself, you can go and read what you wrote just 1 week ago. So I would go home and I wouldn't write it. I typed it. And I don't know why, but I typed it. And that became my form of therapy. And I typed like crazy. And when something would happen to me on the road as a form of therapy, I would go back and I would type it on my laptop. Here's how I felt. Here's what I saw. These were my feelings. It reminded me of this, whatever. So Jeffrey Flanagan comes to me years later and says, would you be interested in writing a book? And I said, I have 225 pages that you can use. And that's what the book is. I mean, he edited and put things in different order and told me after the fact, I need you to write more about this. We're going to cut this down. I mean, his skill comes through in just how the book moves along. But 95% of what you read is my fingertips on the keyboard.
So you literally had all this written information that you had typed out, and you're like, here you go, Jeffrey.
Yeah.
You want to do something with this? Yeah. Right?
Wow.
Yeah.
Well, there's lots to take away. Number one, thanks, Mom, for giving you that advice, right?
Yeah.
And to go home and write it down, quote unquote. Secondly, I had a question for you. So we are very big on writing things down as well, whether it's our goals or journaling for our feelings to make sure that we understand them, or thank you cards. Like writing things down can be very, very powerful no matter the arena.
Especially gratitude.
Absolutely.
We're very big on the gratitude.
You mentioned a counselor and a life coach during those times. Do you seek out coaching and people to speak to maintain that strength?
Well, when my wife and I were married, we decided we wanted to have a marriage counselor. And I don't remember where that came from. I think it was actually her idea. But at that point, she had known that I was not adverse to counseling. And I was still seeing my counselor at the time just to make sure that I was staying healthy. And I started to surround myself with good people. And my wife is that type of a person as well. So we had a marriage counselor our first year of marriage. And the thinking was we want someone to grow with us and know our family, our eventual family. We didn't have any kids at the time. So that if there is a crisis in our marriage, we're not starting fresh with somebody who's like, okay, take me back to the beginning. We sit down with our marriage counselor now, and he's been with us for 15 years. And so, that's my professional counseling. But I mean, I have a men's group with my church. I have 2 men that I meet with at least once a month who have known me since I went through this back in 2005. And I've the easy part of the story is that over time I've transformed my life. I've transformed the way I think about life, how I think about my purpose in life. My new motto, if you will, is I'm not God's gift to broadcasting. But broadcasting has been God's gift to me. And I know that I'm not here to call Royals games. That's not my purpose. When God decided to create me, it wasn't, well, I want him to call Salvi's hit in the wild card game. It was, I'm going to give him this opportunity, and I want him to do more with it. And so I really believe that he allowed me to go through what I went through. He didn't make me go through what I went through. God wasn't on vacation when I went through what I went through. He was fully aware of what happened, but there was a purpose for it on the other side. And so I understand now that this has become a ministry for me. I don't have a church. I don't have a ministry by name, but I have an experience. I have a language that has helped me redesign who I am and what my priorities are. Now that's the easy part. The hard part is I've had to make a lot of changes in my life. I've had to cut people out of my life. Some people I didn't give them really any explanation. I had to block them on my phone. They don't know why they're blocked on my phone. There were some branches on the vine that I had to cut off because it was hurting the vine. And when we cut down limbs on our trees because it's hurting the trees, we don't stand at the tree sometime and explain to the tree and the branch why you're coming down. We just cut it down. And sometimes we have to do that in life. And so I won't say that that's been easy. I mean, because I feel for it, but I have to protect myself. I have to guard my heart. I have to guard my wife. I have to guard my kids. There's music I don't allow myself to listen to that I've listened to my whole life because it reminds me of that party I went to in high school and the girl that I made out with that night when I was drunk and she was drunk, or the bad behavior in college, the songs that just remind me of my depression and my bad behavior. There are things like, I watch, Sarah and I monitor very closely what our kids watch on TV and what they listen to. I have to monitor myself what I watch on TV and what I listen to. My mother-in-law, God rest her soul, passed away this past January of pancreatic cancer. And she was a huge, huge influence on my life. And early in our marriage, and Sarah and I had a rough first 2 years of our marriage, two independent people trying to become dependent on each other. That was tough. Right. And here I am traveling around the country and she's left home alone. And I mean, just, things that I think any woman might imagine when you have a high-profile husband who's going to big cities and she's not with him and not knowing what he's doing. I mean, there were just a lot of things that we needed to work through.
Sure.
But I had this large collection of DVDs, and it was just a dumb guy thing where I didn't watch those movies, but it just, looked cool when you opened up your entertainment center and you look at my library.
You got all the cases all over the place.
Yeah, I mean, it's like I said, it's a dumb guy thing. So Sarah was going through some of the movies, and there were some movies that were R-rated. I mean, there was nothing beyond R-rated, but movies that had some themes that were questionable. And she was asking, why do you still have these movies? Do you still watch these movies? And she wasn't grilling me. I mean, you're just kind of getting to know each other in our first year of marriage. No. When people come and stay with us, do you want them watching these movies? I'm like, well, I mean, if they want to, but I guess not. And when we start having kids, do you want them watching these movies? I'm realizing like, oh my gosh, no. Okay. And she's, well, why do we have these in our home? And I didn't really understand where she was getting, but then she said something I'll never forget. She said, my mom has always said there is a spirit attached to everything. So everything we bring into our home is something we're bringing into our lives, and we're bringing into our kids' lives. And that was pretty deep for me at the time. I had a fulfilling faith, but now when I look back on it now, a lot of it was just surface faith. But I've never forgotten that. And so the extremely long answer to your short question is that the easy part about writing the book and making the changes in my life was helping other people, using my story to help other people, because I feel like that's why I'm here. The difficult part was I had to cut a lot of people and things out of my life, because I had to look at all of the things I had brought into my life and the consequences of that. I mean, I just listened to a sermon this morning at the hotel here in Chicago of a buddy of mine in Indiana, and he talked about your circle of friends. Your circle of friends a lot of time is going to determine what kind of choices you make in your life.
Every time, all day.
It hasn't always been easy, but I know that this is much closer to the life that I was created to have.
Well, one of the several gold nuggets that you just dropped there on us, Ryan, but, realizing that God had a plan for you and he was never on vacation, but you had to go through some of that stuff. But we always say, hey, no matter what happens, look for the blessing. What was the blessing in that happened? But that blessing for you was God was with you through that whole path. you made it through. And now, like you said, that was a part of your path. And just think about, you're blessing so many people that you probably don't even realize, right?
Absolutely.
So the people that just come to you and thank you, that's just a very, very small microcosm of it, because I guarantee it's just like social media is like everyone is watching. So I guarantee, man, like you are helping so many people on that front. So kudos to you, because I was getting some chills on that, man.
Oh, certainly. I think there's a lot of nuggets there. And if you don't mind, I mean, to unpack that a little bit, the quote that you said, I had to redesign my life.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of people just assume this is who I am. Mm-hmm. Or, I'm not going to change. Like I'm 40 years old, or I'm 50. I'm not going to change now. And certainly not going to change for other people. And it's not about changing for other people. It's redesigning your life to make sure that you are the best version of yourself. And I think that's really, really powerful, because number one, we quite literally, as you were logging on at 10 o'clock, had the conversation about the things that we put into our lives through whether it's social media or TV or radio, how we've cut out the news essentially from our life, because it doesn't matter what side of the aisle you're on, left or right or middle, you're going to get negativity from all sides. Right. We talk about this with our teams at our companies.
And how many times do we talk about, as we've progressed in our careers, Ryan, and the things that we do on the business side is we've had to cut people out of our lives, the basement people versus the elevator people. And, whether you block them on social media or you block them from your cell phone, like you say, but you really have to do that, because it's so important, the importance of surrounding yourselves with people who are your cheerleaders, right?
Mm-hmm. Well, another Les Norman quote coming here.
Yeah, here we go.
You want to make sure that they're holding pom-poms and not pepper spray.
That's a good one. I haven't heard that one. That's good.
Actually one that I think we'll take half the credit for that, because we say we want to make sure you surround yourself with people who are holding pom poms, and then less added and not pepper spray.
Yeah.
That's exactly
right.
But
let me say to that. But we need people in our lives that will spray us with pepper spray when we need it.
Challenge us,
right?
And in my business, if I had chosen to continue down this path, because this is where I had started, I was looking for people with pom-poms and telling me that what I was doing was okay. And if they weren't telling me what I was doing was okay, well, then I would find the people that were telling me what I was doing was okay.
Yeah, you're talking about yes people, right?
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Cheering me on no matter what.
No matter what.
And I, when I go back to the beginning of my career, and I got a job with the Minnesota Twins when I was 24 years old. Mm-hmm. And I would do games. And when the game was over, there was this desire for me, as soon as I could leave the Metrodome, was to find a sports bar somewhere near the Metrodome, not just for the alcohol. Not just for the
one right across the street. There was one right across.
Yeah, there was one right across the street. There's a few around there.
Yeah.
But it wasn't just for the alcohol. I mean, part of it was for the alcohol, but part of it was to walk into a room of people who just got done watching me on television. Oh. And so that was a room full of pom-poms.
Yes, people. Yeah.
So I did need some people to spray me with pepper spray from time to time out of love.
Correct.
Not just to, tear me down. Because even today, I mean, there are people that would love to, if they're not spray me in the eyes with pepper spray, maybe spray me in the mouth with pepper spray, just because of the things we talk about during the game. Some people like it.
That's true.
Some people don't. But, I think it was Winston Churchill. You guys like quotes and writing things down. Yeah. If I did anything right, Winston Churchill said, and I'm paraphrasing, but if you ever find yourself walking through hell, keep walking. And I think today I see a lot of people who, first of all, don't even want to allow themselves to go through a personal hell. So they will avoid dealing with the things that I needed to deal with. The cure for some people is more painful than the disease. Then some people find themselves in the middle of their personal hell, and they turn around and they go back. And that's a natural response. And that was me forever. I find myself in this and it's unfamiliar. The only thing is familiar is what's behind me. And I turn around and I go right back to where I started. And then some people obviously just freeze and are just stuck in their personal hell.
So they sit down in their hell.
They sit down
They don't go back.
in it.
They don't go forward.
And they invite other people to be there. So if I did anything, it was, I kept walking. And I didn't know if I was going to make it. I can tell you guys, I don't know if I was going to make it. I was in Toronto at the end of the 05 season. It was our last 3 games. We lost 106 games that year.
Wow.
So I say I had depression at home and at the ballpark. It was everywhere.
It's true.
And but I was lying in bed, and I had started medication a month and a day prior to this night, because everyone said it's going to take about a month for this medication to get into your system and make you feel better. Well, it was a month and a day, and I wasn't feeling any better. And I really began to think about, I might not make it. And if I'm not going to make it, what's this going to look like? Do I just disappear? I don't want people to, I was ashamed of people really knowing what was going to happen to me. So remember that Royals broadcaster? Remember he just disappeared? No one ever figured out where he was. Do I do that? Do I put an end to my own life? And I had a high school teammate, Sean Fitzpatrick, who went to Cal Berkeley and came home one year and took his own life. And he wrote a letter to his family. And the only thing that came out of the letter that was revealed to us was that he just wanted to go be with God. There was a sense of faith in him, but he didn't have any hope that it was going to get any better for him. So he went to the next safest place in his mind that he could go. And I remember lying in bed that night in Toronto and thinking myself, and maybe even in prayer asking, if I did what Fitzy did, would that be okay? Would you accept me? And the answer that I got was, I would, but give me a chance to do something with this.
Wow.
And I woke up the next day. I can't tell you I felt any better. In fact, I felt worse. Wow. And I barely got through that last game of the season. And we flew home from Toronto, and I was scared to death because now here's the off season. And as much as I dreaded going to the game every day in 05 because of my depression and fear that someone was going to know what was really going on in my life, at least I had something to do every day. Now what am I going to do? I'm alone in this big house, and everything in my house just reminded me of all the lies that I accepted as, well, this will make you happy. Well, this will make you happy. That'll make you happy. But I put my head down. I kept walking through hell with the thought of, if I allow God to do this in his way and not with his ending, not my ending, maybe I can make something of this. So the newspaper article, the book, the speaking engagements, visiting with you guys on a podcast and knowing that someone may hear this and that will help them begin the next chapter of their story. But I did have to redesign my life. This wasn't going to occur to me externally. This was something that was going to have to happen internally. I
had to strip it down to the studs.
I was going to have to strip it down to the studs. I was going to have to put my head down and continue to walk through this personal hell that I was going through.
Wow.
So
that got to me.
That's something. So what in that off season, Ryan? What was it what was your daily plan? What was going to get you through that off season to start helping you get on the upward trend?
I dove into everything I could, self-help. I dove in deeper into my faith. I started calling friends that I just really wanted to spend more time with. I started calling people that I needed to apologize to. Mostly girls from high school and college and after college, that relationships that ended ugly. I felt like I had to make amends, maybe more so for me than it was.
And that's okay. Yeah.
And just out of curiosity, Ryan, how did those phone calls go? Because I'm guessing that, let's say, a girl or two probably never thought that they would ever hear from you or hear an apology. Like, what was their reaction when you reached out to them?
Most of them were positive, and most of them were through email.
Sure.
I don't think some of them had been married, and so it didn't feel right to call them out of the blue. Hey, what's going on? Especially with me, who knows what the intention was on my part. So I felt like by way of email, I could really express my thoughts. But most of them were
power of words again.
They weren't all positive, and I deserved some of it. And hopefully, I gave them a chance to tell me, how they felt about me and how the way our relationship ended hurt them. And so I had to take that on. I had to own that, and I was okay with that. I started going to seminars. I really decided to dive into this. The most powerful story I can tell you, though, is I was dating a girl at the time. Ironically, I was dating a girl during all this time and not really sharing with her what was going on. And we had been set up, and she was a high-profile person in Kansas City too, and we weren't a good fit for each other. But I think I'll speak for myself. The concept of her seemed appealing to me, and maybe the concept of me seemed appealing to her. But we weren't right for each other, and the timing definitely wasn't right because of everything that I was going through. I was very insecure and probably a nightmare boyfriend at the time because of that. And we were slowly separating from each other. And we were supposed to hand out Halloween candy at my house in 2005. And she thought of another reason that she couldn't make it. And it was just another whatever. And I went to bed that night and thought, one of us is going to have to end this thing. So I drove out to her house. And I remember just praying the whole way, saying, I am done doing this the way people who are living vicariously through me want me to do this. I'm done doing this the way my culture expects me to do this. Success and accumulation and notoriety. I've done it. It's happened to me at a very young age, and it's not working for me. Focused seminars of Kansas City I went through and helped train for years. Wayne McCamey used to talk about, he's the founder of it, would say, we look through lenses in our life most of the time about right and wrong. Who's right, who's wrong? I'm right, you're wrong. That's certainly the case in politics right now. We're right, they're wrong. But he challenged us, put on a different set of lens and look through life. Is this working or is this not working? Doesn't matter if I'm right and you're wrong. Is this working in our relationship or is this not working in our relationship?
Do you want to be right or do you want to be happy?
Exactly. That quote comes out of that exact same exercise. So when you hear Dr. Phil say, how's that working for you? The genesis of it is, that's great, but how's this working for you? Who cares if you're 100% right? When you look at your life, is this working for you? And so I'm driving out to this gal's house and thinking, this is not working for anymore. I'm ready for something new. I'm ready for a new life. I'm ready for the life that you have for me, the wife that you have for me. It was November 1st, 2005.
And the day after supposed to hand out candy.
Very November 1st, 2005. I'm driving out there. And we have a conversation. It went well, and she was probably relieved, to be honest with you. And we were sitting in my car, and we got out of my car, and I got on the driver's side, she got the passenger side, and we met behind my car and just kind of gave each other a hug and goodbye, and good luck and whatever. And I'm driving down the street, and I remember looking in my rearview mirror and looking at her and saying, this isn't just about her. I'm driving away from a life that I thought was going to make me happy because I'd be making everyone else happy because they could do all the things they wish they could do if they were Ryan Lefebvre. And I'll never forget driving away and saying, I'm driving away from so much right now. That was November 1st. 10 years to the day after the worst season in Royals history, 106 losses in 2005, and breaking up with a girl and leaving a relationship behind. 10 years to the day, I am saying into a microphone, the Royals are World Series champions.
Wow.
I am married to my best friend with 4 kids. Married to my best friend with 4 kids, and we are World Series champions, 10 years to the day. And I don't think that is a coincidence. And I'll share another one with you. I don't know how long we're going on time here.
Ryan,
that was amazing. Like all of
Kansas City. This one's even better.
All right, that's awesome.
Making me cry, man.
I know.
The worst day, the most humiliating day of my life was the last day that I drank. It was January 25th, 1998. I had just finished my 3rd year with the Minnesota Twins, getting ready for my 4th. And I was my coach at the University of Minnesota, John Anderson. I was his golden child because I came from Los Angeles, went to the University of Minnesota, broke a bunch of records, all Big Ten, played very briefly in the minor leagues, but I quit because I realized I was done playing. It was, I've grown up around it my whole life. I was ready to do something different. I was ready to start my own path and not do what Jim Lefebvre's son is supposed to do. So he would bring me out to speak to the team every year and say, here's all Ryan's accomplishments. But he found something else that interested him while he was at school here. He majored in it. He met people in the business. And now look at him. Look at his career. He's broadcasting. I'm in my 20s. He's broadcasting the Twins. I was doing University of Minnesota football, University of Minnesota hockey. And I'm 26 years old or whatever at the time. So he used me as an example. I used my education. I had a successful athletic career, but I had a plan B, and it was there, and I took advantage of it. And I would speak to that to these guys. January 25th, 1998, I'm on campus, drunk, and I get into a fist fight, with one of his current players, who I'd probably spoken to earlier that year about having a plan B and look at Ryan and
being responsible.
And I have to stand in front of my coach and explain to him why me, 26 years old, has gotten into a fight with one of his players. I mean, it was the most humiliating time of my life. So the next day, I have to go on a Twins winter caravan, and we got on a bus and went from one side of the state of Minnesota to the other, and we had a couple of players with us, and it was just getting ready for the next season, and we'd stop in these little towns that had radio station affiliates, and we'd go to a Rotary Club and have a luncheon and do a Q&A with the players, and they loved it. It was a lot of fun. Well, I got this cut on the side of my face, and the first place that we stopped was at a children's hospital. And I told some lie to the nurses about how there was a fight, and I tried to break it up, and I got hit. And so they cleaned me up and everything. But on the drive to this children's hospital, I had a couple of hours to just think about what my life had become. And now I'm getting in fights with college kids, and I have a cut on the side of my face. And I had a mentor in Minnesota who had told me, because this was an incident. This was like 5 incidents that just kept happening over and over again. Maybe not that exact one, but alcohol-related incidents where I was making a fool of myself. And my mentor in Minnesota at the time told me 2 things I'll never forget. Number one, as I'm trying to explain myself through it, he said, "Let me ask you a question. What are you pretending not to know?" Think about that when you have a conflict or something wrong in your life. What are you pretending not to know? And as I'm trying to figure out what that meant, he says, "And let me tell you another thing." Here comes the pepper spray. "Let me tell you another thing. You need to know what people in this profession think about you. They see you as a young man with a lot of talent and very little character."
Wow.
So there's your pepper spray friend.
Yeah,
So
but it's coming from someone who loves you, right?
I'm on this bus going from one side of the state of Minnesota to the other, just thinking and praying, I want to be a man of character. And I don't know what that looks like, but that's what I want to be. Make me a man of character. Praying, show me what it means to be a man of character. So I have another year. So that was the last day I drank. So
Wow.
24 years ago. January 25th, 1998. I do one more year at the Twins. I come to Kansas City. That's rough early on. Fred White gets fired, and I'm sitting in his chair doing radio. I start doing television. The depression comes. I start speaking about my depression. The book comes out. People start to slowly accept me in Kansas City. The team gets better. We win a World Series. I get to call the wild card game. I get to call the miracle 8th inning in Houston. I get to call the last out of the World Series in New York. I'm married. I have 4 kids. We're going to a great church. We have great friends. I mean, life has really turned out a lot better than I ever could have imagined. In November of 2017, I get a phone call, and I didn't answer it. I didn't recognize it. I get a phone call, and I listen to the voicemail. And a woman by the name of Rachel Segovia calls. It says, Ryan, my name's Rachel. I work for the city of Lee Summit. Every year, the mayor has a character breakfast at John Knox Pavilion. And we know that you are someone who feels very strongly about character and would be wondering if you would be our keynote speaker. And I heard this voicemail. I'm like, wow. Now, a lot of good things have happened to me. In the meantime, I've had some tremendous speaking engagements to share my story. But I was just like, wow, the way they put it like that, that was really touching. So I call her up, and we're talking, and I said, I appreciate the compliment. When's the event? January 25th. So I get my phone, the same one, embarrassingly, the same one I have now,
Nice.
my iPhone 7, and I go, oh, January 25th. So I get on my phone. Let me see what I got going January 25th. And it's been on my phone forever. January 25th, last day of drinking.
Wow.
20 years to the day that I prayed to be a man of character, not knowing what that meant. I get invited to be a keynote speaker at a mayor's character breakfast.
That's not by accident, brother.
Now, I'll be honest with you. I had forgotten about that prayer. I hadn't forgotten about that night. I mean, when I look at that date on my phone, I remember what happened that night and how I felt. But when I put the two together, I'm like, oh my gosh, this is when the word character just rang out in my head. And I thought, this is what I prayed for that day, that I'd be a man of character, 20 years to the day. So I always say that I may have forgotten about that prayer, but God didn't forget about that prayer. And he used that day to remind me that he didn't forget about it. And so and those are just, guys, those are just two of things that just keep coming up for me where I know that it has been a great ride and a lot of fun to be a broadcaster for the Royals. It's a tremendous privilege that they've put me in the position to be between you to me, to communicate to you, use the players and the coaches for information and transmit the game to you on radio or television. But that's not why I'm here.
Right.
That's exactly right.
Ryan, number one, thank you so much for sharing that stuff. That was very, very powerful, and I appreciate it.
Those are such amazing stories. Like, I had a few other questions, but they seem so insignificant right now.
Right. Well,
those,
there's something that there's a quote that you had on another article or a show where you said, at this stage in your life and career, your goal is to be around good people, and that's what matters most. Yeah. And today is a very, very good reminder for me personally and for us that is so very powerful. And today you've made an impact on me. You've made my life better by sharing your story. And everyone that's going to be listening to the show, I guarantee you that you've made their life better by some type of motivation. There have been guests on this show that are very close personal friends. They're guests that we've never met, but they've added anecdotes that literally redesign part of my life by one line that they say or a piece of advice that they give. And I just want you to know that there are things today that are going to allow me to redesign or reevaluate. So thank you.
Yes. Well, it's always an opportunity to be with someone like yourself that just reinforces that importance of surrounding yourself with those people who are going to continue to lift you up. Mm-hmm. And again, just have that positivity. Again, like we said, you know, you got to have to be around somebody. So like, if I'm doing something stupid, I know if my brother from another mother, Bobby over here, says something to me, like I will take that, right? Like I get it, right? And vice versa. Yep. So, thank you so much. Yeah. Thank you so much.
Harrison Ford was asked one time, how do you stay so humble and grounded? And he said, I surround myself with humble and grounded people. So
absolutely. That's really good.
That's a good place to start.
It is.
Right.
I want to, before we wrap up, and we certainly want to be respectful of your time. Absolutely. So thank you very much for giving so much. I want to lighten it up a little bit. Would you tell the story of how you're working with the Twins and you're going to kick the tires with the Royals, but really you didn't necessarily really want to be with the Royals. It was more of a leverage situation. Would you tell that story, please?
Yeah. So I had an agent at the time, and Fred White had been fired in Kansas City. And in Minnesota, I was the fifth announcer. So I would fill in on radio and TV as the other guys would take time off. And at that time, our Denny Matthews, the late Herb Carneal, was only doing home games. So I was doing a lot of games on radio on the road, and then I'd fill in on TV. So I was the utility player. And so I was hoping to get a full-time broadcasting job. And I had interviewed for the Tampa Bay Rays job in 97 for the 98 year to be one of their first announcers and didn't get it. And I wasn't ready for it at the time, but I was starting to, as you put it, kick the tires. So my agent calls and said, there's a radio opening in Kansas City. Would you be interested? And I said, absolutely not.
Kansas City? What?
No, it wasn't that. I loved Kansas. You have to understand, I was broadcasting in the Metrodome. Can you imagine what it was like going to Kansas City twice a year with the fountains and being outdoors? I mean, I loved Kansas City.
Great point.
But my thinking was, I was like, I'm not going to be the fool that goes in there after Fred White was fired. You know, I mean, there's a saying in our point. I mean, I had enough trouble in Minnesota filling in for Herb Carneal when he wasn't doing the road games because he'd been there for 40 years. I mean, people didn't care that I went to the University of Minnesota and was a baseball player and did Twins games on TV and stuff. They wanted to hear Herb Carneal, you know. So now I'm going to go to Kansas City where I have no connections and interview for Fred White's job. I told her, you're crazy. At the same time, though, I was scheming for my big raise. I had been doing radio for the Twins for 3 years, 4 years on television, 3 years on radio. And it was time for me to go get a big raise. And I laugh at it now because it wasn't that big of a raise. But for me, it was like this was a big ask. And I talked to 10 different announcers in the league. And I said, I don't want to know what you're making, and I won't tell you what I'm making. But if you were my agent, what's the minimum I should make per game on radio? 9 of the 10 gave me the exact same figure. So here's my big meeting with the radio station. And I worked for the radio station. I worked for, really, it was CBS. CBS owned the radio, TV, and cable station. So I was an employee of CBS. So I go into the radio station, and we have this conversation. Here's what I'm making. Here's what I think I should be making. Here's the reason why, and da-da-da-da. And, I mean, he just shot me down. And, of course, he was so much more experienced in negotiations, and I wasn't. And I couldn't believe he said no. Now, he might have said yes if we negotiated, but I mean, it was just like, well, you know, just because Herb does half the games doesn't mean he only makes half the money, and at your age and blah, 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 da, 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 da. And I mean, I just walked out of there and I was just like, just so dejected and rejected, and I couldn't believe it. I go back to my apartment, and my answering machine is blinking, for those of us who remember answering machines.
Heck yeah, absolutely.
And I hit the button, and the button says, Ryan, my name is Sue Rayson with the Kansas City Royals Radio Network. We have an opening here for a radio position. Your name has come up more than once, and we'd be wondering if you'd be interested in interviewing. So she didn't go through my agent. She didn't know that I had said no. They just called me directly and asked. And I called her back. I said, absolutely, I'd be interested in your radio position for leverage only.
Right. Yeah.
So they fly me from Minneapolis to Kansas City first class. This is a 1-hour flight. You really can't take advantage of first class in an hour. But I was still like, hey, all right.
Impressed. Yeah.
I had told some friends of mine at the newspaper that I was interviewing. I sit in my first class chair. The flight attendant says, would you like a newspaper? I'd love a newspaper. I grab it. I open up the sports page. And on the inside of page 1, on a bar of page 2 on the side, Lefebvre to interview with Royals today. And
oh, you're kidding.
Yes!
It worked.
I'll fly to Kansas City. I'll go to Kauffman Stadium. I'll have a little barbecue. They'll take me back to the airport. And when I land, they're going to be just begging me to stay, So I land.
Wheelbarrows full of money.
Right, exactly. And the Brinks truck is going to be right next to me. Right. So I land in Kansas City. The program director at KMBZ at the time was Bill White. And we find each other, and I go out to the curb. And I get in his car, and before we get off the grounds of KCI, Bill White says, well, Ryan, we're really hoping today goes well because you are our number 1 candidate.
Oh, wow. That had to make you feel good.
Yeah. I was like, wow, right. Really? I mean, I thought after having gone through the Tampa Bay situation, I knew I was like one of 5, maybe 10 or something like that. So I was looking forward to the interview just to see how I would do, but what my motive was. I go to Kauffman Stadium, and I'd been there with the Twins. We go to the old stadium club, and I mean, we have lunch, and one person from the Royals after another stops by the table. I'd known some of them. Hey, glad you're here. I hope this goes well, and we're really looking forward to the opportunity of you working with us. I mean, it was just like way different than the Tampa Bay experience.
Overwhelming, yeah.
Mm-hmm. It literally was overwhelming. That's a perfect word for it. So I go back to the airport, and as you know, there's a lot of time to think between driving to the airport in Kansas City. And I fly back to Minneapolis, and the whole flight, I just kept thinking, you know what? I left my comfort zone when I left Los Angeles to go to the University of Minnesota. And that's another story for another time. Totally unexpected that I would end up there, but I did. And this was my first year of sobriety. And I thought, you know what? Maybe I need to get out of that comfort zone and try something new. And they offered me the job, and I called the Twins and I told them I was taking the job. I didn't say they're offering me a job. What do you want to counter it? I just decided if I'm going to take this job, I'm going to take this job.
That leverage went out the window.
Went out the window. It just felt dirty because the Twins gave me a chance when I was 24 years old, and now I'm going to go to them, and I'm either going to take this job or I'm not going to take this job. And it was a big raise, and so and I was when I made the decision, I was at my grandparents' house in Wisconsin. It was 2 days before Christmas. It was December 23rd, 1998. And I hung up the phone with the Twins, and I was just immediately like, what have I just done? And so I go on with Don Fortune on KMBZ.
Yeah.
And they introduced me as the new Royals announcer. I hung up the phone again like, what have I just done? So I tell my grandparents, and this long story will come to an end, but I tell my grandparents, let's go out to dinner. I had a new job. I'll take you out to dinner. In Little Rochester, Wisconsin, we got in the car and drove to this restaurant called the Coral Reef. And we walk into the restaurant, and the mirrors on the marquee, and they use neon marker to tell you what the specials are.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I'd been to Coral Reef 100 times with my grandparents, and we walk in there. I open the door and we walk in, and the special that night was the Kansas City Strip.
Get out!
Oh, get out of town!
And I had this feeling. Here I'm in Rochester, Wisconsin, and I just had this feeling of peace. That maybe I did the right thing because that was the first thing that I saw when I walked in the restaurant.
That's an amazing story.
That's awesome.
That's an amazing story. Hey, so we want to be respectful of your time, but we have something that we want to run past you because you're a former baseball player. And I know you probably don't remember this, but I was actually in the booth with you years and years ago promoting Royals Fantasy Camp. So Dina had asked me to do so. Years ago, I did the top of the third with Steve Fiziak and Rex Hudler. And then at the bottom of the third, I came and did radio with you and Denny Matthews, just talking about the experience of fantasy camp and trying to recruit these old guys to go down to Surprise Arizona play for a week. I'm just throwing it out there, Ryan, but apparently there's a couple openings that came up for the next fantasy camp. And you probably could pull some strings if you want to come out and hang out with a bunch of old guys and come down to fantasy camp with us for a week. I
love that idea.
I'm just throwing it out there.
Well, the baseball season is 6 months long. If you add in spring training, it's 7 months long. I'm gone for half the time during the baseball season. So if you two are willing to pay for my divorce attorney, I'll see you at fantasy camp.
You know what? So there's a quote that I've heard you say is that, and this wraps it up perfectly on what DC just requested, which I didn't know he was going to say that. But you've said that you cherish the off season so much that when people ask you, hey, Ryan, are you excited for the season? Team's looking good, at the grocery store or wherever. And unequivocally, usually your answer is no, I'm not, because that means that I have to spend time away from my family. Right. And I think that is a perfect way to describe who you are as a person. Is that, yes, you've got this gift, right? You get to, let's go full circle back to the beginning. You're not God's gift to broadcasting, right? You were gifted with being able to do that. Right. But what's important to you and what's so valuable to you is that quality time with the good people, the people that you love, your family, your friends. Yep. And it's not about baseball. You're not put on this earth to be at a baseball field.
Exactly.
Yeah. It's I love it. I really do. I'm grateful for it. I don't know. Even after 28 years, 24 with the Royals, I don't know why me, but it's my job. But it's here in the place where it should be. But it's also a very small part of who I am as a person. And I miss my friends during the summer. I miss my kids. I miss my wife during the summer. And so it's time that I have with them. I get to be a father. I get to take them to school. I get to pick them up from school. I get to do homework with them. I get to take them to football practice and hockey practice, and we get to do more things with our friends. I get to take my wife out on dates. Right. I mean, so the comparison between baseball and a marathon has been made 100 times. But think about it this way. Think about it this way. If somebody runs marathons, do they love running marathons? Of course they do. Or you wouldn't put yourself through that 26 and point whatever miles, right? I mean, it's 26.2 miles. I mean, it is a grinding, not someone who does it just for once as a bucket list item. It's someone who runs marathons. They do it because they love it. But when they're done with the marathon, they don't go run another one the next week. Their body has to recover. Right. And probably the last thing they want to do is run. But then they start to feel the bug again, and they start training again, and they run another marathon. But along the marathon, they're very aware of all the mileposts. It's been 5 miles. It's been 15 miles. It's been 20 miles. I mean, and the goal is to get to the finish line. And the baseball season is just like that. When the season is over, I'm ready for the season to be over. And luckily, my 2 playoff experiences have been a World Series championship and a Game 7 of the World Series. We've never been knocked out, and since I've been here, we've never been knocked out in the first round or eliminated on the last game of the season, something like that. Right. We've either had a season where we weren't going to the playoffs, or we've gone all the way to the end. But when the season's over, I'm ready for the season to be over. It's time. It's done. And I look forward to that time that I have with my family. But I will tell you, when spring training begins and I begin to watch online or read stories about the guys playing catch, and you can see the sunshine and the green grass and the palm trees, I'm ready to start again. And and it's a bittersweet feeling when I get on the plane and I fly to Surprise, because it's going to be hard for our family to go through it again. But when we land and I see that first palm tree in Phoenix and I take that drive to Surprise, I feel like I'm home again, and I'm excited. I'm excited for the upcoming season. So it's an important part of my life, and I'm grateful for it. I really see it as a privilege to have this role in our city, but it also has its proper place.
Absolutely. Man, Ryan, thank you so much for hanging out with us today. You dropped so many great stories. I know Bobby and I feel amazing right now.
I'm ready to conquer the day. Absolutely. I was all ready to conquer the day, and here I am.
Especially. And you being on the road there in Chicago. So, man, thank you so much. And I know the listeners are going to really appreciate some of the stories that you've shared and the journey that you have. So, man, thank you for just being the rock star person that you are.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Well, thank you guys for doing it. And I really appreciate what you're doing. I mean, just the podcast itself, Always Be Cool. There's plenty of podcasts, too many, and just any kind of live stream that just focuses on how bad our world is and how bad people are. And it's there, and I understand that. But
sure,
it sure would be nice if we could turn on the news or turn on social media for a change and hear about all the good that's going on in the world. Yep. So I commend you guys for taking the time, and you got a beautiful studio and set there, and the people that you have on, because it's a privilege to do things like this and to share the good parts of our lives.
Well, thank you very much, Ryan. Before we disconnect the call, stay on the line. We'll stop recording in a second. But ladies and gentlemen, a man of honor, a man of character, strong faith, humility, and of course, talent. Ryan, thank you so much. Ryan Lefebvre, everybody. We hope you've enjoyed this. We certainly have. It's been an honor and a privilege.
Absolutely.
This has been the Always Be Cool podcast. Check us out online where you can download or stream any podcast on Spotify, Apple, or Google playlists. Make sure you find us on Instagram or Facebook at Always Be Cool Podcast. Everybody, Ryan Lefebvre.
All right.
All right.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks so much, everybody.
All right.
If you are hearing this message, you've listened to the entire episode. And for that, Darren and Bobby thank you from the bottom of their hearts.
They hope you enjoyed this new episode. And if you did, please leave them a review on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever else you're listening. Please share this episode with others who may be interested in our community.
Also, feel free to let DC and BK know which business or community leaders you'd like to see covered in future episodes. Get in touch in the comments or on social media. See you next time for a new episode. And remember, always be cool.
This podcast is powered by Summit Lending, NMLS number 1850081, Equal Housing Lender.